Welcome to a new The Watcher talk focused on international relations. This time we're glad to host Emmanuel Navon, Tel Aviv University International Relations professor, author of the book. You can see the book right behind me, titled The Star and the Scepter, History of Israel Foreign Policy, Giubilei Regnani Publishing, and Elnet Israel President. Elnet is an NGO that works for the strengthening of Europe-Israel relations based on shaped democratic values and strategic interests. Welcome to the Watcher Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Navon, The Star and the Scepter. Why this title for your book, and how would you define the recent history of Israel foreign policy in brief?
So briefly, the title is inspired from a verse from the book of Number, which says in the Hebrew Bible, of course, a star will come out of Jacob and a scepter will emerge from Israel. And this verse is puzzling because Jacob and Israel are basically the same person. Jacob received the name Israel after he fought against the angel in the middle of the night. So what is the meaning of those two names? So in a nutshell, Jacob and his twin brother Esav were described as two opposites. Jacob was the spirituality without physical power, and Esav, his twin brother, was the very opposite, physical power without spirituality. And it's only when Jacob proved his ability and willingness to fight in the real world for his spiritual and cultural inheritance that he was renamed Israel. So the star, if you like, symbolizes spirituality and culture and values, and the scepter symbolizes temporal power and political power. And it symbolizes also the Jews, because the Jews are altogether a religion and a people. And so I chose this name because my central thesis after reviewing 3,000 years of Jewish history is that the Jews always have this tension between the star and the scepter, spirituality without power, power without spirituality, and I think we need the two. Finding a balance between the two, which is, and I'll finish with that, it's also a general challenge for all nations in the world in foreign policy, trying to find the correct balance between political realism and ideals, or realpolitik, and values. And that's, in a nutshell, the central thesis of the book.
Let's talk about the ongoing conflict with Hamas. You've added recently that the conflict is also with Iran, which supplied weapons to Hamas, helped intelligence, and supervised the preparation of Hamas' October the 7th attack on Israel. What are Israel's intentions towards Iran, and which country can help mediating with the Iran regime?
There can be no mediation with Iran. There can only be victory. We have to understand that, and I'm not talking about Iran as a country, I'm talking about the Iranian regime, because before the takeover of Iran by the Islamists in 1979, Iran and Israel had very good relations. There were flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. There was very strong cooperation between the two countries under the Shah. But with the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran became a regime led by an ideology that is messianic, that has an obsession with the Jews and with the West. According to the Shia faith, the 12th Imam who disappeared will only reappear after total destruction of the Jews and the victory against the West. And this is a regime that believes in this ideology. So there can be no mediation with such a regime. And since Iran was taken over by the Islamists in 1979, they have established an imperialistic policy of building a network and a web of allies in the Middle East, not only around Israel, but also around Sunni countries, with the local allies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Assad family in Syria, and of course now the Shia-dominated regime in Iraq. And of course they also support Hamas, even though Hamas is Sunni, but they support any terrorist organization in the region that advances their interest to encircle Israel, and that's why it's provided Hezbollah with about 150,000 missiles directed at Israel. and Hamas with also thousands of missiles also directed at Israel. And so Iran today is the main source of instability and war in the Middle East. In order, if we want to reestablish some type of stability in the region, Iran has to be defeated. The regime of the mullahs, of the ayatollahs, have to be defeated, and they have to be denied nuclear capability, because an Iranian regime with such an insane ideology and the ability to strike with nuclear weapons wouldn't be deterred. And that would be a danger not only for Israel, but also for the West. And therefore, it's not mediation that we need with Iran, it's a victory.
Israel's intelligence, by the way, definitely underestimated Hamas' potential in the light of October the 7th Hamas attack. How far has the internal investigation gone? What has already changed? And what will it change?
So the investigation will take place after the war. After the war, there will be a national commission to inquire into this catastrophe. The same way that we had a national commission that was established after the Yom Kippur War of October 1973 that looked into the reasons for the intelligence failure to predict the fact that Egypt and Syria were actually going to attack Israel, and Israel was taken by surprise. But we have to understand also that October 7 is much worse than the surprise of October 1973. And therefore, when the commission is established after the war, there will be a political earthquake in Israel. The Israel of after October 7 is not the same Israel. We have to understand that when the Jews started rebuilding political power, talking about the scepter at the end of the 19th century to rebuild the country after nearly 2,000 years of exile, it was also so that what happened in Europe with the Holocaust would never happen again. And what we had on October 7 was a genocidal terrorist organization. We found Arabic translations of Mein Kampf in the schools of UNRWA and of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. These people came to kill Jews. They killed more Jews in one day than since the Holocaust. They came with the ideology of murdering Jews, and they did it inside the sovereign state of Israel. And the ideology of Hamas, and it's written in their constitution, is to eliminate, not only to eliminate Israel, but to kill all the Jews wherever they are. And they were able to implement this program for a few hours within the sovereign state of Israel. And that is a huge shock in the Israeli psyche. And therefore, after the war, there will be a commission of inquiry, but there's also going to be a huge political earthquake, because it's not only a failure of intelligence. How come Israel didn't foresee it? There was this belief that Hamas could be deterred, that all you had to do was to protect yourself behind this kind of wall of China and induce Hamas with money from Qatar, and they will behave. That has turned out to be a terrible mistake.
Let's remember one more time also the victims. The victims so far of the conflict are above 14,000, almost 6,000 of children. This is so far what this kind of conflict is starting October the 7th already produced. How can Israel, in your opinion, reassure international stakeholders that Israel's current military operation in the Gaza Strip is just a security mission and not a real occupation?
Well, first of all, the figures that you quoted are coming from Hamas, so they have zero credibility. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It has already lied many times about its activities. I mean, at the beginning of the war, it accused Israel of bombing a hospital in the Gaza Strip. It turned out to be a complete lie. So their figures are not trustworthy. They also don't differentiate between civilian casualties and the terrorists themselves. So we should take those figures with a grain of salt. But of course, Israel is committed to the law of warfare. The IDF fights according to international law. We have a whole system in the army and in the office of the Attorney General to advise our officers and to know exactly how to evaluate the risk to civilians, and the IDF tries everything it can, not only to limit to a minimum the number of civilian casualties, but also to enable the entry of humanitarian aid from the Egyptian border to the civilian population in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. So that's first of all. Of course, there are casualties. I mean, when the NATO forces fought in Iraq and in Syria against ISIS, just in Mosul, there were dozens of thousands of civilian victims. The West and the US tried to limit civilian victims to a minimum, but it's impossible to have no civilian casualties when you fight a terrorist organization that cynically uses civilians as a shield. And that's what Hamas is doing. We discovered under the Shifa hospital in the Gaza City that this was the headquarters of Hamas, under a hospital.
In their hospital.
So how can you completely avoid civilian victims? Of course, Israel has no interest in reoccupying the Gaza Strip. We have nothing to look for there. It's an evil territory with evil people, and it's a failed state. What do we have to look there? Nothing. And by the way, Israel left the Gaza Strip. I know that the Palestinians and their supporters love to use the word occupation, but Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005, completely. There was not a single Israeli civilian or military after 2005. And what happened? Since 2005, and especially after the overtake of the regime of the Gaza Strip by Hamas in 2007, they have spent all the resources, all the aid money they received from the world, not to build hospitals, not to build schools, not to build roads, but to build tunnels and to buy missiles from the Iranians. All the money has gone for the military. So we have no other choice but to go back in, not to stay there, but to dismantle the military infrastructure and to behead the political leadership. After that, we have absolutely nothing to look for in this God-forsaken territory.
You mentioned the word. Is Israel satisfied with the international support received so far? And what can be done better, in your opinion, at the moment?
Look, I think that this war has revealed a division in the West. Very clearly, it's a test for the West when you see that most Western governments, nearly all of them, except the most radical one. I mean, there's a new government in Spain now that relies on the Catalan independentists and the far left, and let's say a country like Ireland has always been hostile to Israel. But other than that, most members of the European Union and the UK, all these governments have completely supported, without any limitation, almost Israel's right to defend itself, because they understand that this is no different from what they faced from ISIS in Iraq and in Syria after they were attacked, after the terrorist attacks in France. So when President Macron, for example, said when he came to Israel that he wanted to add Hamas to the list of terrorist organizations that must be fought by the international coalition against Islamic terrorism, it's because he understands that this is the same struggle. But it's more than that. It is also that when you look at the demonstrations in the West, in London, in Berlin, and in Paris, what do they say? First of all, they're all Islamists, except for a few minority of locals. But those demonstrations are mostly radical Muslims who simply were nowhere to be found. Where Assad killed 500,000 of his citizens, they were nowhere to be found. When Gaddafi murdered his own citizens. And they're nowhere to be found now when there's a genocide in Sudan. All they care about is Jews defending themselves. That's what drives them mad. And what do they say at those demonstrations? You have anti-Semitic statements. What is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free? That's a code word for genocide. It means eliminating Israel. And when they say that after Jerusalem will come the time of Rome, it's a message to the West. So people in the West today understand that it's fine to be critical of Israel, to say you should have been more careful here and protected civilians, you should change that. That's fine. We're open to advice and criticism. That's fine. But there's a difference between this and people who call for Israel's extinction. And we have to understand that for them, getting rid of Israel is only the first step to fighting the West and bringing what they call the victory of radical Islam.
We're noticing first signals of truce, ceasefire, hostage exchanges. What are the conditions, in your opinion, from the Israeli point of view, of course, to continue on the path to peace?
First of all, we're not talking about peace now, we're talking about war. And wars need to be won. Wars are either won or lost. There is no peace possible with Hamas. It's impossible because there's no compromise possible with Hamas. So either you win or you lose. And our plan is to win.
How does Israel imagine, in this sense, the near future of the Gaza Strip?
So look, obviously we have to think about the day after. We need to meet the objectives of this war, which is A, to eliminate Hamas's military capability, to eliminate Hamas's leadership, and to free our hostages. This is why we went to war. Because if we don't win that war, what happened on October 7 will happen again. They said it. The leaders of Hamas said that they intend to do it 1,000 times. So we need to defeat Hamas to make sure that this will never happen again. Now, after this happens, Israel, of course, has no interest whatsoever into running this territory. But if we want to prevent a scenario in which Hamas again takes power or another radical Islamic organization takes power, only to use all its resources to build a military intended at Israel, to fire missiles at Israeli civilians, to dig tunnels underground to catch Israeli citizens, and to do what they did on October 7, we need to defeat them. The reconstruction of Gaza will have to happen with partners that are trustworthy. And that means not Qatar and not the UN.
That's the point of my last question for you. Is it reasonable to imagine a peacekeeping mission led by Egypt, maybe supervised by the US, or with EU representatives?
So the future of Gaza will have to be coordinated and discussed with Egypt. Egypt has a border with Gaza, and it should be reopened. Now, of course, the main reason why President al-Sisi sealed the border between Gaza and Egypt is because of his fear of Hamas and radical Islam. Don't forget that he came to power after toppling the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's the one, by the way, al-Sisi, like many other Arab leaders in the region, they pray for Israel's victory. They want Israel to defeat Hamas. They just don't want to do it themselves. They'd rather Israel be blamed for the images of civilian victims. But al-Sisi wants Israel's victory. And once Hamas is defeated, it will be possible to discuss with him the reopening of the border and trying to find a modus operandi, because Israel is not going to reopen its border with Gaza. Let me tell you, until October 7, there were Palestinians who worked daily from Gaza into Israel. The members of the kibbutzim who border Gaza, who were murdered, who were butchered by Hamas, you had peace activists that used to take Palestinian civilians from the Gaza Strip and drive them in their car to Israeli hospitals to get them treated. And those people gave information about the kibbutzim around the border, about the makeup and the structure for the Hamas terrorists who came to butcher them. So let me tell you, Israel now is going to completely seal its border with Gaza, and that means that the only opening is going to be with Egypt. And Egypt will have to be willing to open its border, and the other partners beside Egypt will have to be Western countries and Arab countries that are moderate, such as the UAE, but certainly not Qatar. Qatar is a source of instability in the region. They found the Muslim Brotherhood, they found Al Jazeera, they founded Hamas, and so Qatar is out of the question. And the UN, of course, we know what the UN is. After the war of 2006 with Lebanon, there was a Security Council resolution 1701 that said very clearly that there should be no terrorist organization with any armament in Lebanon. Since then, Hezbollah has built up an arsenal of 150,000 missiles, despite this UN resolution and despite the blue helmets. So they're completely untrustworthy, and we will have to have worthy partners in Gaza to rebuild the future of that territory.
Thank you, Professor Navon.
Thank you.
To Navon to be with us. Leave you with these sentences from Professor Navon. Thank you again for joining us, and goodbye. Thanks for joining us to the Watcher Talk. Thanks.